and we're just retracing our steps back down, and you can just imagine the army guy coming down here frantically, a bit worried because the radios aren't working, trying to find a house with a phone. Okay, we're coming back down to the house.
The circular opening in the trees became the centre of great curiosity for myself and Scott Felton. The immediate thought was, could this be an impact crater? I contacted a PhD geologist whose specific expertise was in impact crater formation. I sent him images and video of what we were now referring to as the anomaly. He could not ascertain from the images if the anomaly was formed by an impact. Seemingly, to identify an impact crater is not straightforward. It is a process of elimination. One needs to rule out all of the possible other causes of such a geological feature before concluding it's an impact crater. This would require a detailed geological study of the area, something which was beyond our budget. One suggestion is the anomaly is merely a turning circle placed at the end of the track for vehicles. We have tentatively ruled this out due to the acute angles where the circle meets the track. Comparing it to a turning circle located nearby, the two are rather different. We couldn't see any evidence of vehicles having used this as a turning point. I then looked at the official seismic report discussed earlier, which shows the epicentral determinations of the supposed earthquake. Incredibly, the anomaly is located very near the 3 previous estimates of the earthquake epicenters. Could this anomaly really be the impact crater of a falling object, which was heard as an explosion and caused the earth tremor? Anyone wanting to study the crater or look it up on Google Earth, here are the geographical coordinates of the site. We wanted to find out what year the trees surrounding the anomaly had been planted. Ardent survey maps are periodically updated. Looking at 2 maps of the area, one from the 1960s and one from the early 1980s, we can see the trees where the anomaly is located are newer than the rest of the woodland. In other words, the patch of woodland surrounding the anomaly was planted more recently, probably in the 1970s. We wanted to find the exact year these trees were planted. Scott Felton has written several times to the company responsible for managing the forest to try and determine when the trees were planted.
But the forests came under the jurisdiction of a company called Till Hill Forestry, which is a national company, but there's a local office for Till Hill. It's Palla Hall, which is near Llanderfel. And I don't like to mention UFOs when I write to people because some people just get upset about it, they get put off or whatever. I just sent a random email, non-specific, just making an inquiry about when that particular wood was planted, the type of trees, and I threw a few other things in around it, place name meanings and things like that, just to give myself the impression I was just a general inquirer, member of the public.
Yes.
And the first thing I got was an email back, basically saying in no uncertain terms, why did I want to know, sort of thing, you know. The guy who sent that email, he wasn't refusing to give the information at that point, but I just wrote back and I said, well, you know, I've just got this interest and I want to settle an argument, mates in the pub and whatever, and that was that. Got no more response from him whatsoever. But I think now what he'd actually done is Google my name, realised there was a UFO connection, and he's just point blank. But I find it incredible that a company just wouldn't even bother to say, well, it's this species, it's conifer tree, and it was planted in this year. I mean, it's just ludicrous not to. And I mean, there's other ways of finding out. To me, it suggests that they may have something to hide, or they know something. But I believe this woodland, there's a whole area of woodland around, but it was all planted at the same time. All these trees are all the same age, but this little piece of woodland around about this anomaly, as we call it, is a lot younger. It was, I would imagine it was post 23rd of January 1974.
Yes, but we don't know exactly.
But we don't know the exact date.
The company has still not revealed the actual date the trees were planted, but we do believe it was in the mid-1970s. Could these trees have been planted to cover up an impact site? In order to search for evidence, we returned to the anomaly with metal detectors. Scott just so happens to be very experienced using metal detectors, having run his own metal detection club in the past.
Right, we've returned to the side of the Berwyn Mountain, and it was 10.5 months since I was last here, and we've come along with Scott Felton today. And what we want to do is, Scott's brought a metal detector, and we're going to search the area to see if we can find any fragments, because we're still unsure about this place where we're standing.
It's a good site because there's very, very little soil, so there's no depth for anything to get lost in. So if there's anything metallic here, assuming what we're looking for is metallic, if it's metallic, the metal detector will pick it up. We don't have to worry about it being faint signals deep down in the soil because there's no soil. We're literally on the bedrock here.
Right.
For whatever reason, when this was made or created, whatever terminology you want to use, it's right down to the bedrock.
Right.
There's nothing left.
And
whatever was gone from here seems to have been extracted and removed.
Right. And outside of this circular area, we've got very densely packed trees up on this very, very steep slope here, and steep slope down there.
I was suspicious about this particular wood because all the surrounding forestry, and there's acres of it. It's all much older, but this appears just after the UFO event.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll only know by doing some metal detection. So let's get cracking. Okay, I'm standing on top of the ledge at the anomaly now, and Scott's just bang in the middle of the circular anomaly, and I'll just pan around, and this is the sort of wall which is or the side which is about 12 feet high, and I'm just standing on top. It's quite difficult to film this because it's difficult to get an appreciation of the shape without actually being here. We really need an aerial shot. And after we've searched this central area, we're then going to search the surrounding trees. Because if there was an impacting object which created this anomaly, there would have been bits flying all over the place. So Scott was just saying that if this area has been sort of hollowed out by man, if you like, then the topsoil isn't here and it's been removed. And the actual slope here it's probably about 12 feet up, and you can see there just behind Scott's head where there's a part of the hill missing, if you like. So if the earth has been removed from here, then it's a vast amount of earth, and it will have contained a lot of rocks, because there's a lot of rock under this earth, Scott.
Well, if you see the slope, it's the whole wood's on a slope, and this slope coming down is a continuation of the slope on the other side of the excavation. Same there, straight down. So this is basically a ledge, taken out of the slope.
Yes.
But the only thing is, what's missing is the spoil.
Yeah.
We would expect to throw it down there and build it up or whatever.
Right,
it's just not there.
So we're going to move on and do some metal detection on the surrounding forest area. Right, we've just moved from where we were before in this circular anomaly, and we're in the woods or the forest, and Scott's just going to scan the area right the way around. This is a pretty steep hill that we're on in the middle of this forest. Right, we've now worked our way around to below the anomaly in a circular fashion. So we're just at the foot of this embankment here.
Silver paper.
Silver paper. We've just spent the last 4 hours searching above and below and to the side of the anomaly, and we found two one pence pieces and a piece of tin foil and a few crisp packets and a can of iron brew. So not very successful, Scott. But at least we've sort of we've done the search, so there's nothing obvious under the ground.
No, the soil's very shallow. There's nothing much that could hide.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything to be found, it'll be within an inch of the surface. So,
okay, all right. So we're now going to officially call off the search.
We are still unsure whether this site has any relevance to the events in 1974, but its location, the planting of trees, and its size suggests that it might be. Further investigation is required. Having covered a lot of the evidence of this case, here is a summary of the most likely scenario of the events. On the evening of the 23rd of January 1974, an active army unit was on standby somewhere within 20 miles east of Llandrillo, probably stationed at Llangollen. At 8:38 p.m, a large object impacted on the side of the Berwyn mountain, and the army was immediately dispatched to seal off the area and possibly recover debris. Locals were kept away from the impact site by roadblocks. Shortly after the impact, a massive red-orange glowing pulsating sphere, approximately 15 meters in diameter, was witnessed by at least 7 witnesses, seemingly resting on the side of the mountain. Due to the terrain, neither the impact site nor the object was visible from the nearest town, Llandrillo. The object remained on the mountain for an hour and 40 minutes before taking off and disappearing. While the object was still on the mountain, the army unit approached it carrying torchlights. We don't know if the orange sphere was the impacting object or whether the sphere came down in response to another impacting object. This is a summary of what most likely happened. This then begs the question, did the military deliberately shoot something down? If they did, this would certainly explain why there appears to have been a cover-up of the event. Over the years, there has been evidence to suggest that authorities have been trying to cover up and muddle up the facts by making misleading television documentaries and putting out false information in the media.
From what I understand, these 5, should we call them gentlemen, were in a car travelling on the road between Llanderfel and Llandrillo, the B4401, yeah. And at some point, allegedly came across the military clearing up a UFO crash. I find that hard to believe because if it was a UFO crash, they literally would have sealed the place off. But these guys were there, they saw what was going on, they claimed to have seen a craft being taken or loaded onto a lorry, and I think they even went so far as to say that there were aliens involved, dead and alive. But the story goes back a little bit further than that, because in documents that they eventually supplied and passed on into the public domain, should we say, there were claims of a military exercise at sea, in the Irish Sea, where 2 UFOs were forced out of the water, apparently near Puffin Island, which is off the coast of Anglesey, which is, again, totally ludicrous because the water's just feet deep, and when the tide goes out twice a day, it's dry sandbanks. You couldn't possibly get a warship into such shallow water. But anyway, these 2 UFOs were forced out the water. There was some engagement took place with one of them, and this particular UFO was fired upon and damaged. As I say, I've not seen the documents, so from a scientific point of view, it might be wrong to totally diss it. But on the face of it, my conclusion at the moment would be that it's a total load of disinformation. Someone else who's got a studio, I think it's a film studio in Conwy in North Wales, he told Margaret Fry, he said that he'd known for years, he said that it was a total fabrication and it was concocted by some people in a pub.
Right.
Looking into it, we got people who've gone along that road all evening. We know of one witness who was coming back from a welding course. Now, he drove along that road at 9:30 just before 9:30, and he saw no obstructions. There was nothing. There was no roadblocks, nothing like that. Although, of course, when he arrived in Llanrhichlo, there were military and police all milling about.
The story about 5 gentlemen in a car seeing a crashed UFO by the side of the road along with alien bodies is not backed up by any witnesses who drove along the same road that night. The source of this story is from a single individual, and the 5 gentlemen have never been identified or come forward. The information is therefore likely to be disinformation.
Well, it's an old trick, isn't it? Tell a true story, but make it look stupid.
Yes.
And then everyone turns against the story.
In January 2011, just a few weeks after Scott Felton started submitting Freedom of Information requests regarding the Army's use of the outhouse at Tai Nant, an article appeared in the Sun newspaper, sporting the usual silly cartoon image of a flying saucer. The article contains an important error. It states that Hugh Lloyd went up the Berwyn mountain in a Land Rover. This is not true. As we have already explained, he went up Bronwyn, which was over 2 miles away from where the object was located. The Sun's article also alludes to the far-fetched 5 gentlemen seeing aliens story. UFO investigators in the UK claim to have spoken to witnesses who were in the Berwyn Mountains that night and claim to have seen alien beings emerging dazed from a crashed spaceship. To our knowledge, there are no first-hand eyewitness accounts of a crashed spaceship or alien beings. It seems the UFO muddle-up was in full swing with the help of Britain's most popular newspaper, read by millions of people every day. In books which have been written by UFO skeptics, they claim that there was no military involvement during this event other than the RAF Valley Unit, which didn't get there until after midnight. These researchers are incorrect in stating this. There was a significant military presence in Llanrhichlo village within 50 minutes of the explosion. We might ask ourselves, firstly, how could anybody possibly know there was no military presence? And secondly, why are these skeptics so keen to try and rewrite the events such that the military were not involved? Is it possible these authors are part of the establishment cover-up and muddle-up? In 2008, Channel 5 screened a documentary about the Berwyn Mountain UFO case. There are other researchers have looked into this case and made documentaries about it. And did they come to this spot? Did they film at this spot?
Never.
No.
And I just want to ask, Mike, have you seen any of the TV programmes that have been produced about this case?
I've seen one, yes.
You've seen one, and then, I mean...
Made them very angry.
Yes, yeah.
So could you tell us, you know...
Well, I was quite outraged.
Really?
Well, yes, because
Right.
it sort of almost made us out to be sort of fabricators, liars and things like that.
Right.
And I waited all my life to say this and put it down on, sort of film.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually what happened.
Scott Felton, being a leading researcher of the case, was approached by Firefly Productions to take part in their film.
Well, originally, like most enquiries, they just turned up and got in touch and said they were doing this programme. It coincided again with the release of government files. And as I understand it, a large chunk of Berwyn UFO files were supposed to be being released, or at least a section of what they had. And the series was covering the half dozen or so most significant UK cases,
Yes.
which just wouldn't go away. I thought no more about it. It seemed quite good. I'd go along with it. I made specific requests that I don't do programmes with certain other people in them who I regard as debunkers. And I was assured that the people I named wouldn't even be in it. It was a case of, well, you know a bit about this case.
Yeah.
It'll be more or less your show sort of thing. The programme makers came along. They spent a week more or less in the Llanrhichlo area. They were interviewing other people who I did know about, witnesses and things like that. And I spent the best part of 2 days with them. I took them up onto the Berwyn Mountains. I showed them where the UFO was, or where I believed it was. I showed them all the evidence to show how I had come to arrive at those conclusions, where the UFO was. I showed them some documents. On the second day of the filming, with the place they were staying at. the B&B place. They
Right.
stayed at a little hotel. They used one of the rooms, and they were sitting people down a bit like I am now.
Yes.
Just going over certain things. So there was an indoor and outdoor. I didn't know anything till the day before the programme was going to be aired. The director of the film crew, I think it was Ian Leveson, not David Leveson, I think we said earlier.
Right.
He rang me up and left a voicemail on my phone, and he said, the good news is the programme's being aired tomorrow. The bad news is you're not in it.
Right.
And then he went briefly on to explain that the commissioning editor of Channel 5 had pulled all the stuff.
Your stuff?
All my stuff, yeah.
Right. The commissioning editor of Channel
The
5?
commissioning editor of
Right.
Channel 5.
Having left out Scott Felton's entire contribution from their film, let's take a look at how one researcher whose contribution was left in the film attempted to explain the event.
During Jenny Randall's investigations into the Berwyn case, she claimed to have witnessed light emanating from the ground, which would fit exactly the same description.
On one of the occasions when I was actually there doing this investigation, I was quite surprised to see one of these earthlights for myself. It was emerging from within the rocks itself and climbing into the sky. But if that was an earthlight, and that was what was seen on the night of this particular occasion, I can well understand why the much greater forces that might have been involved at the time of an earthquake would have generated huge glowing lights that would have been of great fascination to the local people, and why they would have thought that they'd seen something very strange indeed.
The disgraceful treatment by mainstream media of Scott Felton does not end there.
A researcher for the Roy Noble programme, BBC Radio Wales. It's a daily programme that goes out in the mornings. A researcher called Bethan Jones contacted me by email on a Friday and asked me would I take part in a programme the following Tuesday. The government had released some files, and 30 odd of those files were relevant to North Wales sightings. And I hadn't actually read the files at that point, so I told her I'd need to read up on them. Mm-hmm. And in principle I agreed to do the programme. It would have only been a 10-minute slot on the following Tuesday morning. It all came about, the weekend came, I read up on the files and that. And other emails were exchanged, and then on the Monday I sent an email back querying what I might actually be asked, rather than get suddenly jumped on with a question I wasn't sure about. And then there was a bit of silence, and then I got a phone call where previously, what was strange, previously it had all been by email. Then I got a phone call. Bethan Jones, the researcher, said she wanted to talk about the UFO sightings, but she specifically asked not to speak about the Berwyn UFO. Well, of course, that's my forte.
Okay.
And for me, it's the most important UFO case in Wales. And I said, well, you can't have this sort of conversation without this. You can't just exclude it. And it was a case of, well, we'll get back in touch with you. And a while later, another email said, time was against us and we found someone else to do the show. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was strange, because they hadn't actually previously had anyone else, and they had plenty of time. They only asked me on the Friday, so they must have known on the Friday they had plenty of time. So I left it at that, and as far as I was concerned, I wasn't on the show.
Right.
And then early next morning, I think it was about 8:30 on the Tuesday morning, the day of the programme, Margaret Fry, who I know very well, got in touch and said that the BBC had contacted her on the Monday and asked her would she do the very same radio interview. Clearly we put two and two together then. They'd excluded me because I didn't want to, I wanted to talk about the Berwyn, they didn't want it. But interestingly, Margaret Fry actually hadn't seen these files or read them, but she said she'd talk about UFOs in North Wales, and then she was asked not to speak about the Berwyn. She'd talk about anything you want, but not the Berwyn. she obviously contacted me and said, it's your baby sort of thing. I don't know what's over. Is there anything you want me to say? And that's when we realised that I'd been sort of screwed by the BBC. Yeah, well, in the case of Andy Roberts, he's written this thing called the Welsh Roswell. What part of that report, Andy states categorically that he'd had access to documents, files, records, maps in the British Geological Survey. It hadn't been touched for a couple of decades, 20 odd years. And he seemed to suggest he was the first one to see this sort of stuff. And that might be true. But once he'd actually mentioned this information publicly, I thought, well, I want a slice of that. And I wrote to the British Geological Survey. It was the Nottingham office, but I think it was transferred to Edinburgh. And I was stonewalled from day one. Right. I didn't get any replies. I wrote again, didn't get any replies. And this was like going on over a period of 2 years.
Yes.
And in the end, they were just general inquiries to start with. In the end, I got fed up. I filed a Freedom of Information request against the British Geological Survey for the same information. And it was a case of the information he asked for, we haven't got, sort of thing. And then the British Geological Survey tried to blag me with a load of stuff about it's going to cost so many pounds to produce this, which seemed to be contrary to what the Act said you were allowed to be charged for. And it just seemed to be all stalling stuff all the time, stall. And in the end, I got that fed up. There was a Dr. Roger Musson, who seemed to be the main agitator. He seemed to be in charge of...
He was featured in the Channel 5 documentary, I believe.
Yeah, I was quite surprised when he turned up.
All right.
They wheeled out all the veteran debunkers in that programme. But in the end, I got that fed up. I filed a complaint against...
So you still hadn't had any maps by this time?
No, absolutely nothing. But I've been told that these maps and things didn't exist.
By Musson?
By Musson, yeah. And they also denied that they'd ever received my previous inquiries. Yet one of the BGS staff in one letter wrote to me and said, we note that you contacted us in 2006. Yeah. But yeah, then they refuted that I'd actually ever contacted them at all.
Right.
So I went mad about that. I filed a complaint. One of the directors launched an investigation, and then, as might be expected, he did defend his staff, trying to say, well, it's just a bit of a cock-up really, blah, blah, blah. But they suddenly supplied maps and things which had been stonewalled for 2 years on, and which had been claimed didn't even exist, even though Andy Roberts had openly and publicly claimed he'd had access to this very information. There's certain references on those maps which suggest that there actually are several other maps.
Yes.
And I asked for them all, and I got 2. And I believe even one of those had been tampered with.
Yes.
Assuming I've got the same maps as certain debunkers, I've got the same maps, they must have access to that very same information. And this map clearly shows, and it gives a reference number for the position, it clearly shows poachers, it's clearly marked, and they're on a certain mountain at a certain point, Cadabronman Mountain, yet in the debunking literature, they were moved 4 miles to a neighbouring mountain, and a cock and bull story about meeting up with poachers with a lamp, and trying to pass off this poacher's lamp as the light seen by Pat Evans.
I mentioned earlier that the question arises, did the military shoot something down? If you think this is unlikely, I would draw your attention to the well-documented Milton Torres UFO case from 1957. When a US Air Force fighter jet pilot was ordered by British RAF Fighter Command to fire his full salvo of 42 Mighty Mouse missiles at a UFO which had been seen on radar above Ipswich and had moved out over the North Sea. There is nothing to suggest the policy of the British military to fire at unidentified flying objects in 1957 was any different to the policy 17 years later in 1974. This act of aggression, if it happened, certainly would explain the attempts by media shills to pretend this was not a military operation. Finally, I would like to finish with an appeal. The soldiers who were involved in the operation will be in their 60s by now. If you were one of these soldiers, or know of one of them, please get in touch with myself in total confidence by contacting the richplanet.net website.
It's a great way to spend a late Tuesday afternoon on a deserted mountainside in a forest in the middle of Wales.